Let me move to another set of goals, which can broadly be classified under the recognition that jobs, inequality, and industrial policy are crucial. And those are goals number 8, 9, and 10. So goal number 8 is on decent work and economic growth. Goal number 9 is on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And goal number 10 is on reduce inequalities. So why are they important? Let's again look at a few statistics. The combined wealth of 200 richest individuals in the world is over $3 trillion, and that's greater than the total wealth of all of Africa. Bear that stat in mind. We're talking about such massive inequalities that we're witnessing. Despite the enormous progress made in the last 15 years, 800 million people still live in extreme poverty, and the gap between the rich and poor is widening, which is why there have been so many discussions on inequality very recently. According to the IMF, the failure to protect labor rights is responsible for 2/3 of the increase in inequality in developing countries between 1980 and 2015. 1 in every 3 young people in the world is either unemployed or working yet living in poverty. And between 2010 and 2013, developing country economies grew almost twice as fast as the wages that the workers earn in those countries. So there was a time when economic policy used to be focused on how governments could support economic transformation and job creation. But since the 1980s, we've seen a trend where the focus is a lot on growing the GDPs, growing the national economies through liberalization, through privatization, through deregulation. And for years, policymakers have had very little say about jobs. Many countries have followed these prescriptions to the letter. And in the absence of manufacturing, people have had to rely on vulnerable work in services and agriculture. That's why we constantly hear about jobless growth, unpaid care, and a number of other trends. ActionAid is working on these issues with businesses in Bangladesh, in Vietnam, in Uganda, with the youth and women working in the factories. And against a backdrop of rising global concern about inequality, it is increasingly urgent that developing country governments promote the kind of economic transformation that can generate decent and dignified jobs, especially for women who make up the majority of the workforce in the world's factories. And far from undermining growth, higher wages have the potential to reinforce industrial policy by increasing demand for manufactured goods. Global rules deny developing countries access to policies that rich countries once used to industrialize. But a growing number of countries is pushing back against these rules. And if they match these efforts with regional cooperation to protect workers' rights, they can make sure that economic growth delivers for the much more important goal of ensuring that everybody has a decent and dignified life. Let me give you a few examples from the ActionAid experience. Female government workers in Cambodia interviewed by ActionAid highlighted how their work in the city has exposed them to risks, identifying factors like a lack of safety in factory bathrooms, harassment from both factory managers and men loitering around the factory gates, poor lighting and bad roads which expose them to the risk of rape and sexual assault on the way to and from the factories, and a lack of support from police and factory authorities. And we have heard something very similar from Myanmar, where I was there a few months ago as well. In Uganda, ActionAid has been working with young people to help them design their own solutions to unemployment. If I can quote a young mother, Scovia Aretwaite, who belongs to the Ugandan Jobless Brotherhood, she said, and I quote, "Just go onto the street and ask people if they are meaningfully employed. In every 10 people, 8 are unemployed. Alarming is not the right word. I just don't have the right word to describe the situation. I graduated 5 years ago, but I'm still unemployed. I'm constantly told to go and rear animals and go and dig, but where? I wanted to apply to the Youth Venture Capital Fund, but I've had to have 3 referees and a bank account. You must have a registered company, but to get a company, you need to pay somebody. How else do you want us to be more enterprising? So her suggestion, and she argues that the Ugandan government needs to do much less in terms of the size of the government and put more effort in addressing issues like corruption, bribery, and create the right environment where youth like herself can find opportunities and take things forward. And finally, on Goal 16, which Phil has dealt at great length, you cannot have progress if we do not address issues of peace, justice, and strong institutions. So it's really critical that we have a goal that looks at issues of conflict, at inequality, and creating the right environment for gender and social justice. So these are some of the opportunities of what some of the goals can do. And obviously there's an interconnectedness among the goals. But why do we think that it's also one step back? Let me just focus on one question, and the question is, who will pay for all of this? I'm sure when you were following debates in the Paris as part of COP21, you'd have heard questions about financing there as well, and that's been one of our biggest concerns. Again, let's let a few stats here. The IMF estimates that developing countries lose 200 billion on tax evasion and avoidance every year, more than they receive in aid. Developing countries are particularly reliant on corporate tax revenue. It makes up about 16% of government revenues in low to middle income countries compared to 8% of revenue in the rich countries. And research carried out by ActionAid shows that the impact of a lack of public services on women's health, well-being, and safety is immense. For example, a lack of basic sanitation and water services in poor urban areas also mean that women are exposed to sexual violence and harassment when they're forced to use public sanitation facilities and communal water supplies. And while there are many criticisms one can make of the SDG text, the one that stands out is the abject failure of the SDGs to address the issue of corporate tax dodging. And that, in our view, is absolutely critical if you're looking at governments having well-resourced plans and taking governments out of the dependence on aid to more nationally and domestically generated resources.